He didn't wake up that morning planning to vanish. That's the part that makes this story so unsettling. It was an ordinary day. No storms in the forecast. No warnings. No arguments. No goodbyes that sounded final. He told people where he was going. He packed light. He walked into the woods the way thousands of people do every single day. And then he was gone. Witnesses later said nothing about his behavior felt strange. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't running. He wasn't acting confused or scared. He looked calm. Focused. Almost routine. Someone even remembered him stopping for a moment at the trailhead, adjusting his backpack, and checking his surroundings like he'd done it many times before. That image matters. Because people who plan to disappear usually leave signs behind. They cut ties. They make arrangements. They act differently. This man did none of that. He had a phone. He had identification. He had experience in the outdoors. This wasn't his first time walking these trails. He knew the area well enough to feel comfortable going alone. And yet, this would be the last confirmed moment anyone ever saw him. The trail itself wasn't remote by wilderness standards. It wasn't deep backcountry. It wasn't miles from civilization. Other hikers were nearby. Families. Couples. People taking photos. People who came back. He didn't. Hours passed before anyone felt concerned. At first, it was assumed he was just taking longer than expected. Maybe he'd stopped. Maybe he'd taken a different route. Maybe he'd lost track of time. By the time concern turned into alarm, the woods had already gone quiet. And that timing would prove critical. Because when search teams arrived, they weren't just looking for a missing person. They were stepping into a place where something had already erased him. No calls for help. No broken branches. No signs of a struggle. Just a path that ended, without explanation. And the deeper investigators looked into that last normal day, the harder it became to understand how an ordinary walk could end in complete disappearance. Because the woods don't swallow people whole. At least, they're not supposed to. The search began the way all searches do. Fast. Loud. Hopeful. Park rangers were the first to respond. Then local police. Then volunteers. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead. Search grids were drawn. Trails were walked again and again, boots pressing into soil that should have told a story. But the ground stayed silent. The dogs picked up his scent easily at first. Strong. Clear. Confident. It followed the trail exactly as expected, winding through trees and over gentle rises. Searchers relaxed for a moment. This part made sense. Then the scent stopped. Not faded. Not scattered. Stopped. Right in the middle of the woods. Dog circled. Handlers adjusted. They tried again. Same result. The trail ended as if someone had lifted him straight up and removed him from the forest. That doesn't happen. Even experienced hikers who get lost leave something behind. A footprint. A broken branch. A scrap of fabric. A dropped item. Panic creates chaos. Confusion creates mistakes. Here, there was nothing. No sign he'd fallen. No sign he'd turned back. No sign he'd left the trail at all. Searchers expanded the radius. Miles in every direction. Ravines were checked. Water sources searched. Trees scanned from above. Every logical place a body might end up was examined. Nothing. And then came the details that made people uneasy. His phone never pinged again. Not once. No dead battery signal. No emergency call. It simply went silent. The kind of silence that usually only happens when a device is deliberately turned off or destroyed. But there was no phone. No backpack. No gear. As hours turned into days, the search grew larger and more desperate. More people meant more noise. More disturbance. More chances to find something. Still, the woods gave nothing back. Investigators began asking questions they didn't like asking. How does a person vanish from an active search zone? How does someone disappear without leaving a single trace behind? And most disturbing of all, how does a place filled with evidence produce none? By the end of the first week, the search leaders were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Whatever happened to him didn't follow the rules. The timeline should have been simple. He entered the woods in daylight. Weather was calm. Visibility was good. He wasn't racing against darkness or a storm. He told people where he was going. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. And yet, when investigators reconstructed the final hours, the pieces refused to line up. Witnesses placed him at the trailhead just after noon. Calm. Normal. No signs of distress. One person remembered him adjusting his jacket. Another recalled a brief nod as they passed. Ordinary moments. The kind that disappear from memory unless something goes wrong later. After that, time fractured. No one saw him again. No one heard a shout. No one reported movement off the trail. No sudden weather change forced shelter. Search teams calculated how far he could have walked. Then doubled it. Then tripled it. They mapped every possibility. Injury. Disorientation. Panic. Wildlife encounter. Each scenario collapsed under scrutiny. If he'd fallen, there would be signs. If he'd been injured, dogs would have followed blood or disturbance. If he'd panicked, he would have left chaos behind. But the wood showed none of it. Even stranger, the trail itself was unforgiving terrain. Dense undergrowth. Thick brush. Slopes that slow movement. You can't move quickly through it without leaving marks. Yet nothing was bent. Nothing broken. Nothing disturbed. It was as if he had walked straight into a photograph and vanished behind the frame. Investigators reviewed missing person cases with similar patterns. Adults. Experienced outdoors. Daytime disappearances. Sudden stops. No remains. The pattern existed. And it terrified them. Because these weren't reckless people. They weren't unprepared. They weren't careless. They simply stepped into nature and never came back. When the official timeline was released, one line stood out. Subject last observed entering wooded area. No further data available. No explanation. No theory. Just absence. An absence, investigators knew, was the hardest thing to fight. The search began the way all searches do. Fast. Focused. Confident. Rescue teams moved in within hours. Local volunteers joined them. Then state units. Then specialists. Dogs trained to find living people. Dogs trained to find remains. Helicopters circled overhead, cutting slow arcs through the sky. The woods answered with silence. They started at the trailhead. That was the last known point. Boots on the ground. Eye scanning every inch. Searchers followed standard patterns, then expanded them. Circles became grids. Grids became miles. Nothing. Dogs caught a scent at first. That gave everyone hope. But the trail didn't lead deeper into the forest. It didn't veer off toward water. It didn't end at a cliff or ravine. It stopped. Abruptly. as if he had stood still and then ceased to exist. Search leaders marked the location. Ran dogs again. Same result. The scent dissolved into nothing. No crossing path. No return trail. No sign he doubled back. It clings to soil, leaves, fabric. It drifts, but it doesn't just vanish. Yet here, it did. They widened the search area again. Days turned into weeks. Volunteers combed through brush so thick it tore clothing. Helicopters scanned from above. Thermal imaging was deployed at night. Still nothing. No footprints. No scraps of fabric. No broken branches. No disturbed earth. Not even the smallest personal item. Eventually, the effort slowed. Resources ran thin. Hope thinned faster. The official status changed from rescue to recovery. But recovery requires something to recover. And there was nothing. The woods, vast and indifferent, offered no answers. No resistance. No clues. Just trees standing where they had always stood, as if nothing unusual had ever happened. That was when the question changed. Not where did he go? But how could he disappear so completely in a place that leaves marks for everything else? Years passed, but the woods never gave him back. People stopped talking about the case publicly. Files were archived. Search maps were folded and stored away. Officially, nothing new happened. But quietly, the story refused to die. Because there was still no explanation that fit. Experienced hikers go missing, but they leave traces. Even accidents leave evidence. A fall. A body. Something. Here, there was nothing to point to injury, panic, or disorientation. He didn't drop gear. He didn't wander in circles. He didn't try to survive overnight. He simply vanished. Some believe he became lost and kept walking until the forest swallowed him. But forests don't erase people that cleanly. Even decades later, remains are usually found. Bones surface. Clothing appears. This case produced none of it. Others suggest he met someone out there. But there were no signs of another presence. No tracks. No reports. No reason for anyone to be there at that exact moment. Then there are the theories no one likes to say out loud. That the land itself is different in places. That familiar paths can turn unfamiliar. That distance doesn't always behave the way we expect. That sometimes, people step into spaces they weren't meant to find. There's no proof of that. But there's no proof of anything else either. What makes this story unsettling isn't just the disappearance. It's how ordinary it was. No storm. No chase. No warning. Just a man walking into the woods and the world quietly closing behind him. If it can happen once, it can happen again. And maybe it already has. Because somewhere, right now, there are forests people walk into every day. Trails marked as safe. Paths considered known. And beneath the calm surface of trees and dirt, unanswered questions wait. The woods don't announce danger. They don't leave messages. They just keep what they take. The woods don't announce danger. They don't leave messages. They just keep what they take. They just keep what they take.